Rachel was excited. She had just been promoted at her job after years of hard work. To celebrate, she and her husband Tom went to a fancy restaurant. Rachel loved these moments, dressing up, enjoying good food, and spending quality time together. The restaurant was beautiful, with soft music playing in the background and candlelit tables. Rachel wore a bright dress that made her feel confident and happy. Tom complimented her as they sat down, making her smile even more. Tonight was supposed to be special. They ordered their favorite dishes. Rachel laughed at Tom's jokes and told him how proud she was of her new role. Tom listened and nodded, but he didn't seem as excited as she expected. Still, Rachel brushed it off, telling herself that maybe he was just tired. When dessert arrived, the waiter brought out a small cake with the words "Congratulations" written in chocolate. Rachel felt a rush of happiness. She thanked Tom for arranging it, but he quickly said, "Well, I knew you'd like it," before changing the topic. They enjoyed the cake together, sharing bites and talking about their plans for the weekend. Rachel felt like everything was perfect, until the check arrived. The waiter politely placed the bill on the table, and Tom immediately slid it toward Rachel. He didn't say a word, but his actions spoke volumes. Rachel looked at him, confused. "I thought this was a celebration for you," she said, smiling to lighten the mood. "Why don't we split it this time?" Tom frowned. "You got the promotion, Rachel. You're earning more now. It only makes sense." Rachel felt her excitement fade. She had paid for their last few dinners and didn't mind doing it occasionally. But tonight, on a night meant to celebrate her hard work, she hoped Tom would step up. "I don't mind helping out," Rachel said calmly. "But this is a special night. It would mean a lot if you could take care of it." Tom leaned back in his chair, clearly annoyed. "It's not a big deal, Rachel. You're making this into something it's not." The joy of the evening started to disappear. Rachel took a deep breath, trying to keep things light. She didn't want to fight, especially not in public. But Tom's attitude made her feel unappreciated. As they sat there in silence, Rachel wondered if she should just pay and move on. But deep down, she felt this wasn't just about the bill. It was about something bigger, something she couldn't ignore anymore. The restaurant grew quieter as Rachel and Tom sat in awkward silence. The joyful energy from earlier was gone, replaced by a heavy feeling Rachel couldn't shake. She glanced around at the other tables, where couples were laughing and enjoying their meals. She wondered why her celebration had turned into something so tense. Tom finally broke the silence. "You're overthinking this, Rachel," he said, leaning forward. "It's just a bill. Why are you making it such a big deal?" Rachel sighed. She wasn't trying to make it a big deal, but the way Tom handled the situation stung. It wasn't about the money. It was about the effort and thought behind it. Tonight was supposed to be about her hard work and achievements, yet she felt like Tom wasn't celebrating with her at all. "It's not just about the bill, Tom," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's about how you're treating me. I thought tonight was supposed to be special." Tom shrugged, his expression indifferent. "It is special, but you're the one with the promotion. You're earning more now, so why does it matter who pays?" Rachel felt a lump in her throat. She had always been generous, paying for things without keeping track. But this moment felt different. It wasn't just about paying for dinner. It felt like Tom didn't appreciate or support her in the way she needed. "I don't mind paying, Tom," Rachel said, trying to explain. "But sometimes it's nice to feel like someone is taking care of you, especially on a night like this." Tom raised his eyebrows, as if he didn't understand. "You're being dramatic," he said flatly. "It's just dinner. Let's not turn this into a problem." Rachel's heart sank. His words made her feel small, like her feelings didn't matter. She wanted to argue, to tell him how hurt she was, but she knew it wouldn't help. Tom had always been practical, almost to a fault. Emotional conversations weren't his strength. The waiter approached their table, hesitating when he noticed the tension. "Is everything all right?" he asked politely. Rachel forced a smile. "Yes, everything's fine." she said, though her voice wavered slightly. Tom reached for the bill, but instead of paying, he pushed it toward Rachel again. "You're the one making this complicated," he muttered under his breath. Rachel stared at the bill, feeling her patience slip away. She wasn't sure what hurt more, Tom's attitude or the fact that he didn't seem to care about how this was affecting her. As the seconds ticked by, she realized something important. This wasn't just about tonight. It was about a pattern of imbalance and lack of appreciation that had been building for years. She had always been the one to give, to compromise, to make things work. And now she was starting to wonder, was it worth it? Rachel didn't have an answer yet, but she knew one thing: something had to change. The tension in the air was thick, and Rachel felt like she was holding her breath. Tom's attitude, so cold and dismissive, was getting to her. She wasn't sure what to do. She glanced at the check again, and then back at Tom. His eyes were avoiding hers, staring down at his phone. For a moment, Rachel thought about just paying and moving on. She could avoid the argument, let things go, and pretend everything was fine. But as the silence stretched on, something inside her snapped. She had tried to be patient, to explain her feelings calmly, but nothing seemed to change. This wasn't about a simple dinner anymore. This was about respect. Rachel's voice was quieter than usual as she said, "I can't do this anymore, Tom. I really can't." Tom didn't even look up from his phone. "You're overreacting," he said dismissively. His words hit her harder than she expected. She felt a wave of frustration rise inside her, but she tried to hold it back. She couldn't believe that after everything, her promotion, her hard work, the night she was supposed to celebrate, he still didn't understand. Rachel felt completely unheard. Then, without warning, Tom made a rude comment under his breath, something that made Rachel feel small and unimportant. Her frustration boiled over. It wasn't like her to lose control, but tonight, she couldn't keep quiet any longer. In a split second, she stood up and grabbed the cake from the table. She wasn't sure what she was thinking in that moment, but before she could stop herself, she tossed the rest of the cake right at Tom's face. The restaurant went completely silent. The cake, covered in cream and chocolate, splattered all over Tom. The shock on his face was immediate, and Rachel's heart raced. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The waiters and diners around them stared in disbelief. The air was still, almost as if time had frozen. Tom wiped his face, his expression turning from shock to anger. His hands trembled as he grabbed a napkin, trying to clean himself. "What the hell, Rachel?" he shouted, his voice rising. His anger seemed to surprise even him. "Are you out of your mind?" But Rachel didn't respond immediately. She stood there, her chest rising and falling with each breath. She could feel her heart pounding in her ears, but she also felt a strange sense of relief. The anger, the frustration, everything she had been holding in had been released. She had never felt so bold, so free. Rachel took a deep breath and spoke in a steady voice. "I'm done, Tom. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when you treat me like this. Tonight was supposed to be about me, about celebrating something good in my life. But all you've done is belittle me. I won't accept that anymore." Her words were calm, but they were firm. The quiet around them felt louder now, and Rachel felt like the eyes of everyone in the room were on her. Tom, still covered in cake, stared at her in disbelief. His anger was clear, but Rachel could see something else in his eyes, something that looked like regret, or maybe fear. Without waiting for him to say anything else, Rachel grabbed her purse, turned on her heel, and walked toward the exit. The door swung open as she stepped out into the cool night air, leaving behind the mess, the tension, and the man who had never truly seen her. As Rachel walked away, she felt something inside her shift. The weight that had been hanging over her for so long seemed a little lighter now. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew she couldn't go back to the way things were. The cool night air hit Rachel's face as she stepped out of the restaurant. She paused for a moment, taking in the streetlights and the quiet of the evening. Her mind was racing. She couldn't believe what had just happened. The cake, the argument, the walkout. Everything felt like a blur. But one thing was clear. She wasn't going back inside. Rachel felt a sense of freedom, but also uncertainty. She wasn't sure if she had done the right thing. Part of her wanted to turn around, to go back inside and apologize to Tom. Maybe everything would be fine if they just talked. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. As she stood there on the sidewalk, her phone buzzed in her hand. It was a text from Tom. "Come back. We need to talk." Rachel stared at the message. She could feel the urge to reply, to make everything better, but she held herself back. Tom had a way of making her feel guilty, making her feel like everything was her fault. She had been in that pattern for too long. She had given him chance after chance, always hoping things would change. But tonight had been different. She wasn't going to let him manipulate her anymore. Taking a deep breath, Rachel turned her phone off and stuffed it back into her purse. She needed to clear her head, to think. Walking down the street, she passed by a small cafe that was still open. It looked peaceful inside, with soft lights and a few people sitting at tables. Without a second thought, Rachel walked in. The warm atmosphere inside the cafe helped her relax. She ordered a coffee, sat by the window, and looked out at the quiet street. Her mind drifted back to the dinner. What had happened to the man she had married? How had they ended up here? She thought about the years they had spent together, the good times, the laughs, the shared memories. But as she sat there in the cafe, she realized how many moments had been overshadowed by frustration and disappointment. Tom had always expected her to give more, to do more, but he rarely returned the effort. He never seemed to appreciate her. Rachel stared into her coffee cup, the steam rising in little swirls. She thought about her promotion. It was a big achievement, something she had worked hard for. But now it felt tainted by the way Tom had treated her. That cake wasn't just a symbol of celebration. It was a sign of everything that had gone wrong in their relationship. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Tom. "Please, Rachel, don't leave me." This time, Rachel didn't even look at it. Instead, she picked up her coffee, took a sip, and closed her eyes for a moment. It was hard to let go, but she knew she couldn't keep living like this. She couldn't keep giving and giving, only to be treated like her feelings didn't matter. After a few more moments of quiet reflection, Rachel made a decision. She wasn't going to go back to the restaurant. She wasn't going to go back to the man who had humiliated her. She was going to take control of her life, even if it meant walking away from the person she had once loved. Rachel finished her coffee, stood up, and walked out of the cafe with a new sense of strength. The road ahead was uncertain, but she was ready to face it. It was time to start a new chapter, one where she was no longer afraid to stand up for herself. And for the first time in a long while, Rachel felt a sense of peace. She knew that, no matter what happened, she would be okay. Rachel sat in her car, the engine off, staring out at the quiet streets. Her phone sat in her lap, still buzzing with messages from Tom. But she didn't open it. She needed space. The night had been so intense, and her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. There was a part of her that wanted to pick up the phone and call Tom, to explain everything, to make it right. But as she sat there, she knew deep down that this wasn't just about the cake, or the bill, or even the argument. It was about something much deeper. For years, Rachel had been giving more than she had ever received. She had worked hard in her job, putting in long hours, hoping it would lead to the promotion she just earned. She had given everything to her marriage, believing that love meant making sacrifices, being there for each other through thick and thin. But over time, she had started to feel like she was the only one trying. Tom's behavior that evening was the last straw. Rachel thought back to the early days of their relationship. Tom had been caring, attentive, and always ready to help. They had built their life together, one step at a time. But as the years passed, something changed. Tom became more distant, less interested in her achievements, and more focused on his own needs. He had stopped seeing her as an equal partner and started treating her like someone who was always there to do things for him. She had never questioned it. She had just kept giving, thinking things would improve, thinking love meant sacrifice. But now, after the cake incident, Rachel was forced to face the truth. She had been giving too much, and Tom hadn't been giving enough. He had stopped seeing her as a person with her own dreams, desires, and worth. He had stopped supporting her the way she needed him to. As she sat there in the car, Rachel thought about her promotion again. It was a huge accomplishment, one she had worked hard for. But Tom hadn't celebrated it with her. He hadn't even tried to make her feel special. Instead, he had turned a night of celebration into a small, bitter fight over a bill. That was when it hit her, the realization that she had been trying to prove her worth to someone who didn't truly see her anymore. Rachel took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs. She knew that leaving wasn't going to be easy. There was a part of her that still cared for Tom, the person she had once known and loved. But she couldn't keep living in a relationship where she was always the one doing all the work, always the one sacrificing. Her thoughts wandered to the future. What would life be like without Tom? The idea was scary, but also strangely freeing. She knew it wouldn't be easy to let go of the life she had built, the dreams they had shared. But she also knew she couldn't stay in a situation that made her feel unappreciated and unseen. For the first time in a long while, Rachel felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to realize her own worth. She didn't need Tom's approval or validation. She was enough on her own. Rachel finally started the car and pulled away, her mind clearer than it had been in months. The road ahead was unknown, but she was ready to face it. It was time for a new chapter, a chapter where she put herself first. The story of Rachel's cake-throwing moment quickly spread beyond the walls of the restaurant. It wasn't just the unusual scene that caught people's attention, but also the way Rachel had stood her ground. A fellow diner, who had witnessed the entire event, shared what had happened on social media. The post quickly went viral, and Rachel became the subject of many conversations. At first, Rachel felt uneasy. She had never wanted to be the center of attention, especially not for something like this. But as the reactions flooded in, she couldn't ignore how the public was responding. People from all walks of life reached out, many expressing support for her actions. They admired her courage, her strength, and the way she had walked away with dignity. Most of the comments were positive, with strangers from all over the world cheering her on. They praised her for not letting Tom's behavior slide, for standing up for herself in a moment that could have easily turned into a humiliating situation. Many women shared stories of their own struggles in relationships where they had felt underappreciated or unimportant. Rachel's story resonated with them, and they saw her as a symbol of empowerment. But not everyone shared the same opinion. Some people criticized her, saying she should have handled the situation differently, or that throwing cake wasn't the best way to solve things. A few even blamed her for escalating the conflict. However, these negative reactions were outnumbered by the positive ones, and Rachel found herself reading the supportive messages more than the critical ones. Despite the mixed reactions, Rachel couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The fact that her small act of defiance had inspired so many people made her realize just how many others were silently going through similar struggles. She hadn't planned for any of this, but it was clear now that her decision to stand up for herself had sparked a larger conversation about self-worth and respect in relationships. Rachel's phone continued to buzz, but it wasn't just strangers who were reaching out. Her friends and family also sent messages of encouragement. Her sister, Mia, called her almost immediately after hearing the news. "You're a hero, Rachel," she said excitedly. "I've never been prouder of you." Her parents, too, reached out. They had always taught Rachel the importance of standing up for herself, and now they were happy to see her do just that. Even though they were concerned about the argument with Tom, they couldn't help but feel relieved that Rachel was finally taking control of her life. But the biggest surprise came from Rachel's workplace. Her boss, Karen, called her into her office the next day. Rachel wasn't sure what to expect, but Karen's first words were, "You've made a lot of people proud, Rachel." Karen explained that the office had been buzzing with admiration for Rachel's courage. It turned out that many of her colleagues had been in similar situations, and seeing Rachel take such a bold step had inspired them. They saw Rachel not only as a capable professional, but also as someone who knew her own worth and wasn't afraid to defend it. Though the attention was overwhelming at times, Rachel couldn't deny that it felt good to be supported by so many people. She realized that her actions had started something bigger than she could have imagined. A movement where women were speaking up for themselves, where they were no longer afraid to demand respect in their relationships. As the days went by, Rachel's confidence grew. She was no longer the woman who quietly accepted things that didn't make her happy. She had become a symbol of strength, and she was beginning to see herself that way too. As the days passed after the incident, Rachel felt like she was waking up to a new version of herself. The public support had been overwhelming, but it wasn't just the attention that changed her. It was the feeling of empowerment she had discovered. She realized that she had spent far too many years letting Tom's behavior go unchallenged. But now, she was starting to put herself first. One evening, while sitting at her kitchen table, Rachel looked at her phone again. She had received another message from Tom. His words were full of apology and regret, begging her to come back. But Rachel was no longer moved by his pleas. She had read enough of these types of messages before, each time with the same empty promises and half-hearted attempts at change. Rachel knew what she had to do next. She had always believed in marriage, in the idea of working things out. She had tried for years to make it work with Tom, but after the cake incident, everything had become clear. Their relationship wasn't balanced. He wasn't listening to her, and he wasn't treating her the way she deserved. He hadn't even celebrated her promotion or supported her in a meaningful way. She realized that it was time to move on. With a deep breath, Rachel picked up the phone and dialed the number for a local law firm. She had made up her mind. She was going to file for divorce. The process wasn't easy, and it wasn't something Rachel took lightly. She spent the next few days meeting with a lawyer, discussing her options, and learning about what was involved. The idea of officially ending her marriage was daunting, but it also felt like the right thing to do. She needed to close this chapter and step into the future, a future where she could focus on herself and her happiness. One afternoon, Rachel sat down with Tom at their kitchen table. He had tried to reach her multiple times, but Rachel had put up boundaries, asking for the space she needed. Now she was ready to speak the truth. "I've made my decision, Tom," Rachel said quietly but firmly. She could feel her heart racing, but she knew this was something she had to do. "I'm filing for divorce. I can't keep living like this." Tom's face fell. His eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, he said nothing. Rachel could see the guilt in his eyes, but she also knew that guilt wouldn't change anything. Words without action were just empty promises. "Please, Rachel," Tom said, his voice shaking. "Don't do this. We can fix it. I'll change." But Rachel shook her head. "I've given you chances, Tom, but nothing has changed. I can't keep waiting for things to get better. I need to take care of myself now." The words were hard to say, but they felt freeing. For the first time in years, Rachel wasn't afraid to stand up for herself. She wasn't afraid to make the tough choices, even if it meant facing a future alone. As she stood up from the table, Tom remained seated, staring at her in disbelief. Rachel felt a mix of sadness and relief. She had once hoped for their marriage to work, but now she knew it was time to move on. She had learned to listen to her own voice, and that was the most important thing. Rachel walked out of the house that day feeling lighter, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she was ready to face it. She was ready for her new chapter, one where she could be her own strength. The days following Rachel's decision were filled with a mix of emotions. She felt a strange sense of peace and relief, but there was also a sadness that lingered. Ending a marriage wasn't easy, no matter how clear the reason seemed. But deep down, Rachel knew it was the right choice. She had taken control of her life, and now she had to move forward, no matter what. Tom, on the other hand, was struggling. He had always been used to things going his way, especially when it came to Rachel. For the first time, he couldn't understand why she was leaving. After all, he had always thought they would be together forever. The idea that Rachel was walking away was more than just a shock. It was a wake-up call. At first, Tom tried to reach out to her, sending long texts filled with apologies. He said he was sorry for the way he had treated her, for not appreciating her enough, and for taking her for granted. But Rachel remained firm in her decision. She had heard it all before. Words without action were meaningless now. He tried calling her, but she didn't pick up. He even showed up at her door, but Rachel had already made it clear she needed space. She couldn't go back to the way things were, and she wasn't about to let him manipulate her with empty promises. For a while, Tom's pride made it hard for him to admit the truth. He couldn't understand why Rachel had reached her breaking point. They had built a life together, and he had always believed their relationship was strong. But the reality of what he had lost slowly began to sink in. Rachel had been the one who had always supported him, who had stood by him through the ups and downs. Yet, he had never truly seen her, until now. Tom began to reflect on his actions, his behavior over the years, and the many times he had taken Rachel for granted. He thought about how she had always put others first, how she had done everything to make their marriage work, while he had become more distant and selfish. As he sat in his living room one evening, the weight of his mistakes started to feel unbearable. He realized that Rachel's decision to leave wasn't just about one incident. It was the result of years of neglect, of not treating her with the respect and appreciation she deserved. For the first time in a long while, Tom felt regret. He understood that Rachel wasn't asking for much. She just wanted to feel valued. She had wanted to be seen as an equal in the relationship, not just someone who would take care of things while he did his own thing. Tom knew he couldn't undo the past, but the realization made him start to change. He began taking steps to improve himself, to be more self-aware, and to understand the true meaning of love and partnership. He sought therapy to work through his issues and started to examine his own behavior, something he had never done before. Though Tom's path to understanding was only beginning, he knew one thing for sure. He had lost someone truly special. And while he couldn't change what had happened, he could at least try to become a better person, not just for himself, but for the ones he loved in the future. But for Rachel, the journey had already begun. She was moving forward, no longer waiting for someone to change. She was embracing her independence and strength, ready to shape her own future. It had been a few months since Rachel made the decision to leave Tom, and she could feel the change in her life. The sadness that once hung over her had slowly faded away, replaced by a quiet strength. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. Rachel had always been a hard worker, focused on her career, but now she was dedicating time to herself. She joined a local gym, something she had always wanted to do, but never had the time for. She reconnected with old friends, the ones she hadn't seen as often when her life had been focused on Tom. It felt good to laugh again, to share moments with people who cared about her. Her job was going well, too. After the promotion, Rachel had thrown herself into her work, but now she felt more confident in her role. She wasn't afraid to speak up in meetings, to share her ideas, or to push for what she deserved. Her colleagues noticed the change in her as well. They admired her confidence, her drive, and the way she carried herself. Rachel had always been capable, but now she had a sense of self-worth that had been missing for so long. Rachel also began a new project, one that was close to her heart. She started a support group for women who had gone through difficult relationships, just like she had. She wanted to create a space where women could share their experiences, find strength in each other, and know they weren't alone. The group quickly grew, and Rachel found herself leading empowering discussions, offering support, and listening to stories that mirrored her own. It was fulfilling in a way she hadn't expected. Though Rachel was busy with her new life, there were still moments of reflection. She thought about Tom sometimes, but now, instead of pain, it was more like a quiet understanding. He had been part of her past, but she had grown beyond that chapter. She had learned so much about herself, about what she deserved, and about the kind of relationship she wanted in the future. The past was no longer something to dwell on. It was something that had shaped her into who she was today. Tom, on the other hand, was still on his own journey. He had reached out a few times, sending messages that spoke of regret and apologies. But Rachel didn't respond. She had no ill will toward him. She simply knew that there was nothing left to say. He had his own path to follow, and she had hers. One evening, as Rachel sat on her balcony, watching the sunset, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The city below was alive with energy, but here, in this moment, Rachel felt calm. She had rebuilt her life, and she had done it for herself. She didn't need someone else to complete her. She had learned how to stand strong on her own. As she sipped her tea, Rachel smiled. She was ready for whatever the future held. She had faced her fears, embraced her strength, and stepped into a new chapter with hope and determination. The past was behind her, and ahead lay a life full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, Rachel felt truly free.